Welcome everyone. Today we are in the guest and the host of Louw, a remarkable, highly well-known South African personality who is involved in the economy as well as involved in changing the economic landscape of South Africa. He is the head of Free Market Foundation. And in today's program, A Nation in Crisis, we are here to evaluate and we are here to get his views. Welcome, Mr. Louw.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Adil, and hello to the viewers and to the whole of South Africa. We're going to find solutions.
Fantastic. I think to kick it off quickly, let's talk about yourself briefly. Who are you, Mr. Louw? Where do you come from? What was your background coming up into South Africa? And your experience has been South African. What has shaped you?
It's a colourful past. I started off growing up in a very, very conservative, white-dominated right-wing town called Potchefstroom. My father was very keen on his kids learning and speaking English because he recognised that would be the future international language, of which he was right, which is why we're speaking English. And I went to an English school and then an English university, Wits University, where I got philosophically and ideologically converted and became a Marxist and became an anti-apartheid activist. And I'm very proud of the role I played in my modest way as a student. And then, after being a Marxist and a communist, I was converted by a little old lady trading on the street corner, in the corner of Brienrissik Street, who converted me to being a free market libertarian. And people say, well, that's a big change. And I say, no, it's not so big. As a Marxist, I wanted the withering away of the state, and I still do. I just want it to happen quickly. What has always been an advantage to us is that we have been politically agnostic and unaligned. We've worked with all the political parties, ZAPO, PAC, and even something like the AWB had me address them on the future of South Africa post-94. And we've had we see ourselves as a policy institute. We have to get people to adopt good policies. And that is the government of the day. Whoever the government is, we have to try and persuade them to do things differently, to do things in a way that is more economically free and more productive and more progressive. And so we've never really had political enemies in South Africa ourselves, even under apartheid. We were working openly. We've always been transparent with all the political movements. The Committee of 10, and Tata Motlana was a very good friend of ours. I had a very strange story I'll just tell briefly. Once visiting the ANC office in New York, which was the United Nations office, the American office was in Washington. And the librarian over there, that was the main ANC in Exile library, was his non-indigenous language was Afrikaans. He came from the Free State. And he said to me, could I get him a copy of the Freedom Charter in Afrikaans? Because there were lots of Afrikaans-speaking black South Africans in exile who couldn't read English. So I came back and I couldn't find one anywhere from the United Democratic Movement and from all sorts of other groups, the Committee of 10. And so I asked the security branch. I literally asked the security branch if they could give me a copy of the Freedom Charter in Afrikaans. And they didn't have one, but they translated it. So one of the odd things I've had is that the current official version of the Freedom Charter was created by the apartheid security branch for the ANC in exile. And there are now 3 or 4 versions, but the very first translation was when we broke it because we were able to speak to both sides. And I was at risk. I had the ANC, I had the PAC, I had the ZAPA, I had the apartheid regime telling me that we needed to live a careful life because we were at risk. And I said, but surely you control the people who are the risk. And they said, no, we don't. You've got to be careful. No, I wasn't. I've always just been optimistic and assumed I'll be fine.
You touched briefly on the aspect of economic freedom. And in between us, you were explaining why Free Market Foundation has been pursuing the economic freedom aspect of it. You then even indicated that in the Freedom Charter, in the ANC's Freedom Charter, the apartheid government, in the then apartheid government of Forster and Botha, all said that actually they had a hand in the drafting of some of the inputs of the Freedom Charter. Can you quickly take us into that insights and explain to us what happened in that machination process? Take us through the journey of what actually happened in that process when the apartheid government was busy formulating the Freedom Charter in conjunction with the then Liberation Organization.
Yes, this is a very controversial history, and of course people want the Freedom Charter to be whatever they want. It's a choice what you want to believe it is. But the point is, I didn't personally have much to do with who drafted it and what they did, but what I do know is that there are very big misconceptions about what it says. And the ANC president at the time, or one of the leaders, Tambo, and people like Louw, were all asked after the Freedom Charter was drafted and published whether it was a communist or socialist document, and they all said, no, it's not. It's about economic freedom, and it's about, and Oliver Tambo even called it capitalism, which comes as a great surprise to many people. And then there are things like the land shall belong to the people. Well, as Mandela said, belonging to the people doesn't mean belonging to the government. It means belonging to the people. And so there were ways of interpreting it. I personally was a full supporter of it at the time, and when I converted from being a Marxist to a classical liberal capitalist or libertarian, I found myself more at ease with the Freedom Charter than before, because it presupposes private ownership, it presupposes freedom of trade, it presupposes multi-party democracy, non-racialism, and so these are all values which the Free Market Foundation advanced and proposed over the years. We've never supported a particular document. We've always just supported the values of personal liberty, and a lot of those can be found in the Freedom Charter. Now, I understand that the Freedom Charter is a Congress movement and it didn't have the support of other movements, which is fine. People want to claim ownership of whatever philosophy they have. That's okay. I'm all for egos and all for people wanting to claim high ground. I say the Freedom Charter is not policy. It's not a South African document. When people refer to it, I often say to them, it's a policy document drawn up in the 1950s, long ago, under very different conditions. And this is an important part to understand. It was when communism was presumed to be the wave of the future. It was the dominant philosophy amongst intellectuals. It looked as if communism was taking over the world. And for the ANC to adopt a document which was not communist, that is very important. People need to understand that was quite a statement in those days. And when the most support they were getting was from the communist world, to not adopt a communist document was very, very important. And people forget the context and the history today. And that makes a very big difference from what you see in the document if you understand the historical context.
Now, in your views, Mr. Louw, what is your view regarding the South Africa's state-owned entities? Should they be privatized or should they remain state-owned entities? We've got over 820 state-owned entities in South Africa. Mainly there's top five, big five, as we always say in South Africa. That is your SAA, your Eskom, we have your DNL, we have Transnet, and then we have Telkom, which is a partially privatized state-owned entity. In your view, should these entities be privatized or should they remain state-owned?
Yes, let's understand that privatizing is not really the big thing. This word privatize, as I said, is a new word in the English language. It didn't exist until the 80s. And it was invented, it used to be called denationalize, was the word. And since it's now become normal and happening all over the world, all over Africa, all over Asia, there's privatization is the norm. Now, should our state-owned enterprises be privatized? Well, there are three ways to privatize. One is just deregulate, just allow competition, which is what happened to SA Airways, and its market share fell from nearly 100% to nearly zero. And that means that it was privatized, but the state never got anything for it. So you could have sold it and got billions of rands and had the same effect. But by just allowing competition, SABC is another thing. There's something like 300 private broadcasters. SABC used to be a simple monopoly. It is still state-owned, and it's still popular, and it still reaches more South Africans than any other station, but it is no longer a state-owned monopoly. Now, could you say SABC has been privatized? That's not the word you would use, but the point is there are now 300 private operators just by liberalizing, deregulating. The next way, of course, is for the state just to stop doing stuff, discontinue. Now, a very good example of that is forestry. All forestry used to be state-owned. It simply discontinued running forestry, and private forestry is now the norm in South Africa. And the same is with liquor. All liquor to black South Africans was a state monopoly. It just discontinued it, and then private suppliers emerged. And so that's the one there. The other one is what most people mean, selling. Well, you could sell state-owned monopolies or state-owned enterprises. They don't have to be monopolies. And the advantage of that is the state gets money. And the state gets revenue from what it owns. And so the fourth way is to give away. Now, I am very much in favor of what I call people's privatization. Give the state-owned enterprises to the people who work for them, the employees. Create employee ownership trusts, management trusts, and just give them to the people.
Now, coming back to the bigger question, and really the question that has been in most of South Africans' mind. We have the South African Reserve Bank, which is privately owned. In your view, from a free market foundation point of view and perspective, should the South African Reserve Bank remain in private hands, or must it be nationalized?
Yes, again, this is one of these issues where people think the answer is simple and straightforward. The first thing you've got to ask is, why do you want a reserve bank? Why do you want a currency in a nation? And the answer to that is not at all clear, as people think. You don't have to have a currency. So the question you have a currency is really a matter of ego. It's pride, and I always say, should reserve banks be run by bankers, or should they be run by psychologists, because they're more of an emotional issue? Then if you say, well, what is their job? And if you think their job is to provide a stable currency, it doesn't really matter who they're owned by. In Hong Kong, the currencies are entirely private and competitive. There are 3 or 4 competing currencies. And in some countries, there's no currency at all. The Francophone countries, places like Senegal and so on, they don't even have a currency. They use the French franc. So you don't need a reserve bank, or you don't need a currency. So why do people want to nationalize or privatize or have a mixture, which is what we have? At the moment, the state president appoints most of the board and the governor. So in a way, the state is in control. Even though they are nominally private shareholders, they have very little to do with it, and they're limited to a maximum, some very low number, I think like 700 shares. Doesn't really matter. So the question is, why do you want one or the other? Now, most people who want to nationalize the reserve bank or the currency want to do so in order to inflate it, to have more money issued. Now, is that really what you want? Because inflation penalizes savers, which are poor people. Poor people save, rich people borrow. So do you really want to reduce the value of the currency? Now, if you want to nationalize it in order to make it more stable, well, that'll be a good idea, because you don't want it to inflate. That penalizes savers, which means the poor. And you don't want it to deflate, because that penalizes investors and borrowers. And so you want it to be neutral. You want stable currency. Now, what will achieve that? Will it be private or will it be nationalized? And I don't think, frankly, that it makes much difference. I don't have a strong opinion. All I want to do is get the Reserve Bank to stabilize the currency.
Now, the most burning question in most South Africans' minds today is, we have the ANC, the ruling party, alongside all its opposition parties, which somehow seem to be now in agreement, including the DA. They are more likely now in agreement with the ANC, particularly favoring the current President Cyril Ramaphosa. What is your view about President Cyril Ramaphosa's leadership? Has he been able to create the kind of success that he was actually presented to be, the miracle saver for South Africa, someone who will bring about change? He was liked by the markets, but today we are told that South Africa is not performing. There is a zero and negative growth. Yet we have a man in power today, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was a favorite candidate and darling of capital. Yet there is an investment boycott. What is your view?
Yeah, I think the mistake he made is when he was president-elect, before he was president, after the Mangaroon conference, elective conference. He should then have taken a stand, a clear stand. He's been trying to be all things to all people. He wants to be all things to the unions and the people receiving boasts about how many people receive social grants. We should be embarrassed by that, not boasting about it. It's not an achievement to have people on welfare. It's a failure to have people on welfare. And so I think that what he needs to do and should have done is say, where does he stand? What's his paradigm? Where does he put his peg in the ground? Is he for capital? Is he for markets?
It is for capital, obviously so.
But all he's done is presided over more government control and more government debt and more government spending. So he has talked the talk, but not walked the walk. He's not made South Africa more investor-friendly.
So you are telling us that, in your view, from a Free Market Foundation point of view, that Cyril Ramaphosa, as the President of South Africa, has failed.
Yes, I think
in leading South Africa.
He's failed in leading South Africa in a clear direction. Either go towards a controlled developmental state or go towards a free market economy, but don't do neither. I mean, what has changed? You know, what law has changed? The laws, let me give you a simple example.
Yeah.
There's a law currently before Parliament called the Ultra Law, the Ultra Act, the Upgrading of Land Tenure Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Upgrading of Land Tenure Rights Act, which was passed in the transitional years, 1993, gave all black South Africans the land on which they live. Just said they own it. And all you have to do is issue a title deed. Before Parliament, as we speak, there's an amendment to the Act that says, no, that land doesn't actually belong to black people and now belongs to the state and they must apply. In other words, we have a gigantic act of expropriation without compensation against poor people, black people.
So the land is taken back from the poor people.
The land is taken back from
by the state.
By the state in the new South Africa under the Upgrading of Land Tenure Rights Amendment Bill before Parliament. It is despicable. I cannot believe that anyone is allowing this to happen. This is the wildest fantasy of apartheid group area law. But never envisaged such a big nationalization of black land.
Most people were in disagreement. We agreed to say probably most of us are being anti the current administration, which is under the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa. When we cautioned against the adoption and actually putting into presidency a candidate who for some years has been in capital and has not been exposed in terms of the living conditions of our people, has lived a rich man's life in a rich man's world. And that individual was given the opportunity to lead South Africa. Most people decried that fact that he's not going to be able to succeed. But white people in majority in South Africa supported his candidacy, including capital. They said this will be the best candidate. He will uproot corruption. He will do away with BEE. He will do away with all the favorite laws that were actually so-called advancing black people. He would look at capital and he will enrich South Africa's economy. That hasn't happened. No. But you don't get an outcry from the white community, from the capitalist economy, from the Free Market Foundation saying that we are now at a stage where we believe that Cyril Ramaphosa as the president of South Africa has failed. Why is it so?
That is a very interesting political question, because in every state of the nation addressed since Mbeki, look at every one and you will see they all said they're going to remove red tape, they're going to create an investor-friendly environment, that under whose leadership, and I'm not attributing this to one person, Ramaphosa, Mbeki, Zuma...
No, but let's hold it back to the current administration. Every administration has failed, we know.
Yeah,
the current one was given to us as the success model.
But it made no reforms. In other words, if you say, where is the liberalization? What law was relaxed or repealed? Has exchange control been removed? Has banking been made more easy for informal businesses to enter into the financing industry? Electrification, something you know about. You might recall that in the old South Africa, when there was no electricity in black areas, there were private power generators. People ran generators and sold electricity. So there were kettles and TV sets and so on in black areas. Now that's illegal. So the point is, where is the liberalisation? Where is the actual change? A bill before Parliament that says the following laws are being scrapped or relaxed or repealed. Where is something that the state is disposing of that it doesn't need? Surplus land.
But Leon, we gave capital its wishes. We all agreed and agreed to the announcement of Cyril Ramaphosa as the new president of South Africa after the rule of President Zuma. We said President Ramaphosa will give us the hope, as capital dictated, that they wanted a candidate that will be from capital, and they selected him against Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. They said Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma will fail, South Africa will go into the negative economic growth. But if you elect President Cyril Ramaphosa, you would have growth, you would have investment, you would have South Africans living a better life ever, you would have infrastructure and everything. 4 years now, in currently as a president of South Africa, and none of those things has happened.
Nothing.
What is Free Market Foundation's position on that particular issue?
Well, our position was and is under Zuma, Ramaphosa. We didn't have a favorite, or we just said what you should do, whoever you are. And what you should do has not been done. It is they've talked the talk, walked it. So did, by the way, Zuma. Zuma's State of the Nation addresses all said the same thing. People are forgetting that none of them did what they said they would do, which is to free up the economy, balance the budget, remove red tape, stabilize inflation, free up borders for trade with SADC countries and the rest of Africa, get rid of exchange control.
But Zuma was removed for not performing. Ramaphosa is in power, and the libertarian free market, free capital economy is still unhappy about his rule today. They are giving him less criticism. When you look at the papers, there is not even an analysis of the current failures, the crisis that the country is in today.
No, but let's just understand something very carefully. Other organizations criticize leaders and people and politicians. We have never done that. We stick to policy. What should be done and what has not been done. We would never criticize Zuma, Mbeki, Mandela, Ramaphosa. We don't attack the person. We tackle the ball, not the player.
No, but it doesn't work like that. You cannot be in a rugby match and not scramble with the player in the match. It has to be on the basis of player himself being taken into account in terms of his activities. Free market capital received a candidate of its choice. We are in a free market administration.
Sorry, Odile, just hold on a sec. Capital isn't free market. It was very, very important to understand that. Capital wants the government to regulate, keep small business down, informal business
regulated and out.
Regulated and out. So that is why everyone says we're going to remove red tape to allow the small business sector to rise, informal businesses to rise, small businesses to form and grow. And that's not allowed. Capital, big capital,
yes,
doesn't want a free market. It doesn't want the poor to be economically free. So one mustn't confuse. There's no such thing as free market capital. There's free market or libertarian, and there's capital. And capital, like labor, has its interests. It promotes its own interests, and that's what it does. And if the interests are government subsidies, government protection, controls and regulations, they will support it. Unions, organized business and organized labor, in our view, are exactly the same. They do what they want to do, they lobby what they want to do. We say we are willing to work with both to try and get them to be for better policies. For example, unions. Unions should want to increase demand for labor. That's obvious, okay?
But there's been a decline in demand for labor.
I know.
There's been more people unemployed. There are more factories shutting down. In the same sector that we're in today, in Ekurhuleni, we're sitting in a situation where there are factories lying, all of them empty, derelict, unused, infrastructure sitting, and there are no people.
Yeah. So
what has free market achieved in terms of encouraging for SME development, encouraging for the free flow of capital, for the free flow and the creation of new business?
Well, what we've not achieved is, for example, to get unions, labour, to start calling for the government to free up capital so there can be more jobs and more employment.
But the president just said this government does not create jobs.
Whether the government creates jobs or allows the creation of jobs is really the issue.
He said that in his views, if I quote him correctly, he said that it's a responsibility and role of business to create the jobs.
But then he must allow it. And Labour must say to him...
How will that happen?
Well, he's got to liberalise, scrap exchange control and lower taxes and balance the budget and secure property rights and free up the market.
What should South Africa's tax bracket be? On income tax, on corporate tax?
Okay, I don't want to... The way to get the number is to look what are the tax brackets in the countries that are high growth. Mauritius, Rwanda, China. Go and look there. Now in China, by the way, you have to look at the special economic zones, which basically there's a tax holiday, zero tax.
Zero tax, yes.
So that's where 80% of China's capital formation is. Now we supposedly have special economic zones, but there's nothing special about them. They don't have tax breaks, they don't have labor relaxation, they don't have free trade, they don't have anything that you get in China. So what we should do is say to China, please give us your policy for special economic zones, and we should just turn South Africa into a the whole of South Africa, or at least we create some serious ones. The whole of China has 7. We have one in every province, one little place in every province.
So
which
in
is meaningless.
in your view, if I get you correctly, you're saying that South Africa should be a safe haven for capital.
For capital, for investment.
Zero taxing?
Well, in special economic zones, yes. And those zones need to, in South Africa, maybe 1 is enough, maybe 2.
I mean, in the UAE, we know that in Dubai, it's a free trade zone.
Correct.
Which means it's a safe haven for capital.
We should do exactly the same. We should say, how have they turned a little fishing village in the desert into one of the world's most dramatic, prosperous cities? Let's do what they did. Just copy them.
Coming back to the original question, the Free Market Foundation, its role, aspirations, and its policy-making mechanism. Find yourself in a scenario whereby you are invited by the ANC, the current ruling party. It says we are in a crisis. We have mismanaged the economy, we have mismanaged the country, we haven't been able to provide the promise that we gave to the people. If you were to give us a paper that says this is the trajectory that we must take, what would be the priorities by the Free Market Foundation in order to help the ruling party, the ANC, or the incoming other political parties? For instance, the EFF that is coming up into power, or the DA that might be able to snatch power, or Action SA in alliance as well as in sharing of power with other political parties. What would you advise the ruling party, present and incoming ruling party in South Africa?
Okay, let's focus on them as opposed to the other parties, which I'll get to. What we need to do is to say that if they come and they say we have failed, that's a hell of a good start. I mean, to stop pretending to have succeeded when you failed. Come and say we failed, what must we do to succeed? We are the ruling party, we want to stay the ruling party. How do we turn South Africa into a winning nation? Then what we would do is firstly roll out a lot of the policies we've already produced, and certainly we could produce a policy blueprint. For example, instead of repealing the Land Titling Act for black people, give them title. Let them be owners. Get rid of this RDP.
So you're in support of expropriation of land?
No. The government is wanting to expropriate all the land that already belongs to black people. There are more black landowners in South Africa than white landowners, but they don't have title deeds. They're owners. And so what the government should do is just give them all title deeds, free. And so that's one thing. The other thing is it should free up the informal business sector. Zoning laws in townships that make it illegal to own a spaza shop or to be a backyard mechanic or to do trade in any way, run a school, whatever. Scrap them. just say that from now on, anyone who earns a peaceful living and voluntarily acts with other people is free. Now, that will be, you'll have a list. I mean, I could give you a list of 70, 80 laws that need to be reformed or repealed. Well, very, very simple. Now, if you don't do that, you will continue failing. You have failed because you didn't do that. You said you would and you didn't. Now, let's just, you are an expert on energy. Now, just let's look at that. Eskom did not build new power stations because in the 1970s it was told that 30% of new power would be privately supplied. It did the right thing by saying, okay, new investors are coming in. Then Alec Erwin, who was the minister, for ideological and philosophical reasons, didn't want to license any private power stations. So Eskom continued to be a sole buyer and sole producer as a monopoly. And it hadn't built. So the energy shortage was guaranteed by, actually, I'm sorry to say, Alec Erwin and his personal philosophical values against the government white paper. You know the government white paper perfectly well, which said that there would be at least 30% private generation and supply of electricity. The market would be freed the way it is everywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world has energy markets. We don't. We're sitting with an old apartheid dinosaur, as we do in most of these state-owned enterprises. So what we would do is say to the government, he has a blueprint, say what you've promised.
So on energy?
On energy. Under Zuma, under Mbeki, you've promised energy markets. Now have energy markets. Get rid of the energy regulators.
So to throw a quick spin on the energy markets. Energy, for instance, there is a law that says South Africa allows for independent private producers. But not a single independent private producer wants to play the free market space.
No.
They all want to be given government sovereign guarantees and 20-year IPPs, which are 20-year tenders. Is that free? Is that encouraging of free enterprise?
That is absolutely right, and this is your area of expertise, and you hit the nail on the head. It is not free, and freedom would be where energy generators are free to trade with each other, sell to each other. You may not, just to give you an example, be a member of the European Union. You may not enter the European Union unless you have free trade in energy. So someone in Poland can sell energy to someone in Spain, and they in fact do. So what we should have in South Africa is what they've promised, which is that private producers enter the market and trade energy. Not that they don't have to. These deals with Eskom, by the way, are shocking. They are disgraceful. Because what happens is Eskom has to pay them. By the time you include integration and you include constant supply, you're talking about something like maybe 4, 5, 6 rand per megawatt. Per kilowatt. And if you go to, and Eskom is not allowed to sell because of NERSA, National Energy Regulators controls, for more than whatever it is, the figure, 1 rand something or other. So in other words, Eskom is forced by law to run at a loss with these so-called private producers. They're not market producers. The fact that they're private doesn't mean they market. That's very important. We need a market in energy in which, whether it's nuclear, whether it's coal, clean coal...
So private producers, not necessarily selling to the state, but producing to sell to the open market.
Absolutely, and I would liberate Eskom. I would liberate Eskom. Let Eskom compete and trade and sell. Don't force them to buy energy at a loss. I mean, this is crazy. It's loony. So
moving back onto banks, what should the government do? The government is in a crisis. They say they have failed. Whether they are in a coalition or they are currently the ruling party with the ANC. There is a failure in South Africa. The economy has collapsed. What would your input in terms of all the 80 top policy points be on banking, financial institutions?
Well, firstly, we need to understand what they are. And there's a great misconception over here. Banks are not the property of rich people or a few rich people. Banks,
but in South Africa they are.
No, they're not. Something like 90% of the wealth in a bank belongs to the savers, the depositors, which is the poor people. The same in financial institutions, medical aids, trusts, unit trusts, whatever. And there's a great confusion over here. The wealth in banks belongs to ordinary people. The bank manages the wealth of poor people and lends their money to borrowers who tend to be rich, which is why they are considered secure enough. And so they are earning income for the poor who put their money. So what they should do about banks is, in my view, very simple. Firstly, break the myth that banks belong to rich people. They don't. The stock exchange does not belong to rich people. The stock exchange belongs to poor people. And so we need to, the stock exchange is a computer. It's got no assets, no wealth. There's nothing there. It's all outside somewhere and in many, many forms. So what we need to do with the whole financial sector is do what has been done in virtually every other country. Countries like Zimbabwe no longer have exchange control. Countries like Mauritius now have free banking. Just invite the bankers of the world to come to South Africa, the bankers of South Africa to go to the world and get banks to compete properly with each other. So that what they do is they serve the interests of the depositor, who is my concern. I'm in favor of depositors.
Perfect.
They are the most important people. Borrowers, I don't really feel strongly about. They don't need me to care for them. They can care for themselves.
Mr. Louw, thank you so much for the wonderful, most insightful interview and inputs. The behind-the-scene team of OnSpot, as well as the production team that has put this together, we are quite grateful, and thank you so much for the most wonderful, heated and passionate debate that you have given us. And we're looking forward to more insightful views. And we hope one of these few days you'll get a call from the president calling you to say, we need help. Can you help us? Thank you so much.
My honor and my pleasure to you and the viewers, and thank you for the honor of being your guest.
And to the viewers, we say look forward to more episodes on OnSpot in relation to a nation in crisis. We love our country, South Africa. It's the most beautiful country, but we're in crisis, and we're doing hopping of spots to speak to various people on what can be done to correct the current mess in South Africa. And from us to everybody, we say thank you so much for your time and looking forward to seeing you again in the next episode.